Hi, this is Marla Phillips. I'm Director of Xavier Health at Xavier University, and I wanted to share with you an executive overview of the Good Supply Practices initiative that we have been leading from Xavier University since 2012 with many of you and perhaps even your organizations. So I wanted to give you an idea of what it is that we've been doing, starting with the end in mind. So we've been developing good supply practices, and we feel that the GSPs really complete the GXP suite and help increase the confidence that you have in your product. So through this work, we have engaged 5 countries, 44 companies, 2 industries, being pharma and device, as well as the FDA. And through our work, we have identified 3 brand new key concepts. So we haven't been working to improve what's already out there. We have been working to identify true root cause, which has revealed these really neat key concepts that are shifting the way we think about our supply chain. And from those key concepts, we have developed 12 practical solution tools that are very easy to implement. And the foundation of all that work has been a paradigm shift that we identified that will transform your company just by even knowing what the paradigm shift is. So I wanted to share with you the themes of gaps that we identified in the current supply chain. And one is that we do not understand our own product and process very well. There's a lot of gaps that we have understanding what specifications we need of our product and the materials coming in and so forth. Our supply chain systems are not robust, and if we have them in place, then we often are circumventing the systems that we have, whether it's because of time pressures or just lack of alignment or other reasons. And finally, we do not behave in a way that engenders trust with our suppliers such that we can maintain a healthy supply chain. And so through all of that, it's interesting that you can notice the we. And the reason that's interesting is because when we first started off, the thought was we have got to figure out how to qualify or certify our suppliers because clearly the suppliers must be causing the problems. So from the gaps that I just pointed out on the previous slide, you can then understand why we have a never-ending cycle of man in the plant, increased metrics, added testing, increased oversight, and a lot of resources focused on how do we fix the problems we are experiencing. Well, obviously, that cycle is not going to end if we're not focused in the right area. So our paradigm shift has identified that we are causing the problems, or we could have prevented the problems that we are experiencing. Even if you think of what you might say is your worst supplier, you can ask yourself, well, who put that supplier in our supply chain? So again, by looking in the mirror, we can then identify some true root causes and start to develop solutions that will make a difference and will break that cycle. So we can focus on cross-functional alignment of requirements and making sure we even know what we're supposed to be doing with our product and our supply chain and our suppliers. Understanding the material and how it would perform in our product the way it's intended. Understanding material variability and its impact on our product. Supplier engagement, when to engage the supplier, how to engage them, thinking of them as subject matter experts. And mitigation of self-risk. If we are causing the problems, then we have to obviously then admit that we are inducing risk into the process. So what is the risk element that we are bringing to the equation, and how do we mitigate that? And so by understanding that, we are seeing increased efficiencies, a right first-time approach and success at it, preventative actions instead of dealing with failures and corrective actions all the time, and improvement ideas. So it's a total shift that can transform your company today just by understanding that paradigm shift. We also identified, as I mentioned, 3 key new concepts. The first one is supply by design, the second one is self-qualification, and the third one is relationship risk. So this is the true GSP value, understanding these concepts and then developing solutions around them. So the first one, the supply by design, as many of you know, whether you're on the pharma side or device side, quality by design or design controls, there's a lot of effort that goes into developing the product and understanding our product. But if we don't then follow that with an intentional development of a supply chain that can support the quality needed by that product all the way until it reaches your patient or your customer, then all the work you did in developing your product could be for nothing. So the integrated risk reduction that occurs when you match an intentional design of your product with an intentional design of your supply chain is very powerful, and that carries the product of the quality of your product through development all the way to being on the market. So I wanted to share with you the 12 different solutions we've developed. So several of them are in a section that we refer to as setting the foundation. So understanding your own risk and asking yourself, how qualified are we to be in any relationship? We're very good at qualifying suppliers, but let's think about self-qualification. Then there's knowledge management, and then supply chain risk. And this is an important one because many of you might be thinking, how am I going to implement anything new? We're already stretched too thin. The supply chain risk management helps companies triage the risk elements and identify where to focus instead of saying you have to do all of this all the time with every supplier. So it takes a very pragmatic approach to using the tools that we've developed. The second section or grouping of solutions is called internal alignment, which is so important. So you have cross-functional team formation that helps you understand who should be at the table and what requirements does each group have before you then start racing to identify suppliers and getting product on the market. The next one is material requirements. So again, understanding that variability of the material that's coming into your product, having an engaged discussion with your suppliers and using them as subject matter experts to understand the impact of their material in your product. The next one is initial selection criteria, and so many of you are doing risk assessments of your suppliers, but this is a more robust approach to looking at risk elements and often risk elements that are not considered in the supplier selection process. We do talk about single source versus multi-source. Being dual sourced or multi-source does not necessarily reduce your risk, and so this is like a little vignette that helps explain the pros and cons of both so you can make the right decision for your company. And then a communication strategy. What will you communicate depending on the supplier, the criticality, the relationship you have, and what you need to understand from them. So again, we provide you information so you can make the right decision. The next grouping of solutions is external alignment. Once you've aligned internally, now you can engage your supplier in meaningful dialogue. So this supplier engagement is key. Then we look at a holistic qualification that includes the self-qualification as well as the initial selection criteria that has a lot more risk elements in it than you might be thinking, as well as the material requirements. So it pulls all that together for a holistic qualification. And then importantly, a new concept that I'll share with you in a few slides is the overall relationship risk and how that works. And then finally, we have life cycle management. So making sure that we do everything commensurate with the need, and we identify how much effort to put into the ongoing maintenance of our supply chain, and we don't just put it in a drawer once we've developed it and forget about it. So very important concepts that we discussed in that solution. And just pointing out that all the solutions with the blue stars are actively being tested right now in feasibility studies by many of your colleagues across the industry. Okay, so the GSP solutions, it's a right first time approach. And so the first example I'd like to share with you is how we do the cross-functional involvement. So imagine a spreadsheet where the left-hand column has a lot of functional groups, I think 17 or so functional groups listed. And then the next column over says, okay, what are some examples of what is needed from the supplier by that functional area as you're looking at developing your supply chain? So environmental health and safety, there's examples of what they need to understand from the supplier, carbon footprint, safety data sheets, and so on. The next column is what can the environmental health and safety group contribute to your supplier selection process? So we have examples listed there, and these are just excerpts from the actual spreadsheet. So then the next question is, we want you to go to that functional group and ask if they feel their involvement has been missed, or if they are involved, if it has been at the wrong time. So, for example, you've already sealed the deal, and now you're engaging them saying, okay, I've agreed to use this supplier, now go fix everything. And so we don't want you to decide this. We want you to go talk with them and figure out if that's happening. And then in the end, you can decide as an organization with alignment that, yes, we're going to involve this functional group in the process, or no. And it can be no because maybe it's I just need to get some information for that group, or they're going to do a quick search on the supplier and gather the public information and let me know that, hey, they're about to be shut down for stack emission violations and things like that. So you may or may not fully integrate these functional groups in the supply chain process, but at least you're going to be making an informed decision. So again, imagine a spreadsheet filled with functional areas with the same kind of process. So the next one is supplier engagement. So we have what are typical product life cycle descriptions: discovery, early phase, late phase, and then the supplier relationship state. Now you might see that the supplier engagement is a little bit shifted to the right because, as we mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that we are aligned internally on what we need, like what's most critical for this particular product, what we need on the market, where it's going in the world, before we then go to a supplier and tell them what we need just to have it changed 10 times or get a different story from different functional groups. And that's what really starts the whole cascade of processes. And you want to engage your supplier in a very meaningful way. And so we go through that, but this is just a great tool to visually show you how that works. And so the boxes down towards the bottom are other examples of our solutions and how they fold into this whole process. So the initial supplier selection, as I mentioned, so picture again another spreadsheet where you have rows of risk elements that you might not have considered before. And so I have a category shown here that falls under supplier product and process technical capability. You want to get with your cross-functional group that you have decided needs to be included, and you want to ask each other, what's the relative importance that, for example, the bottom one, that we have familiarity with the equipment used by the supplier, and you rate it 0, 3, 7, or 10. And let's say you really, really need to understand it this time. And then you ask yourself, well, does the supplier fit your need? Meaning, will they let you come in and see their equipment? Will they train you on it? Or do you already know and understand the equipment they're using? So it helps you make the right decision for yourself. And another example that I always love is there's a question that asks, what's the relative importance that your supplier is not a competitor of yours? So I mean, there's so many different business relationships out there. Oftentimes, single functional groups don't even think about those types of things. So if you have proprietary information, you might want to make sure that your supplier is not a competitor of yours. And if not, you could say, well, we really don't care. So again, it just helps you make the right decision for that particular product and your supply chain. Now, as I mentioned, if we have self-risk, we have to basically qualify ourselves. How qualified are we to be in this relationship? So we have examples here from the product and process technical capability category. And scoring how well we even understand our own processes and our products and the materials coming into it. So again, this would give us an idea of gaps that we might have and weaknesses we have as we're looking at different suppliers. And when we get to the relationship risk, I'll show you why that's so important. Okay, so typical relationship is not usually considered. We look at the supplier in a silo. So here's a grid where it's a spider diagram where you have a supplier score for this first supplier is 20, and so that's related to a low performance. And supplier 2 in green is a risk score of 60, so they have higher performance, so that's actually a better supplier. So we would typically say, well, why wouldn't I choose supplier 2? They're lower risk. If all things else are equal, I would certainly choose supplier 2. Well, what you don't know is looking at, if you parse out that data and see what's in that bigger score, you can look at the categories that we've developed and figure out, well, where exactly is the risk? And so then if you map that information, you can see, okay, their quality and regulatory compliance is pretty low performing. They're very strong technically. They're kind of low, again, on the operating systems and business capability, and their relationship alignment is fantastic. And some of the information that goes into relationship alignment are things like their flexibility and capacity, their ability to meet our demands, which is very important in some cases, and I'll show you why in a second. So now the second supplier, if you map out their weaknesses and strengths, you can see that they're similar on technical capability, they're better on operating systems, they're a lot weaker on relationship alignment, and they're a lot stronger on quality and regulatory compliance. So again, you might say, great, I still want to go with the second supplier because the quality compliance is so critical to us. But what you haven't factored in yet is your own risk and your own weaknesses. So when you do that, you take a look at this and you see that your own compliance is pretty strong. So you have systems in place to make sure that your supplier is operating in an acceptable way. You're pretty strong with that. What you're not strong in is relationship alignment. So for example, you might have a very difficult time forecasting this particular product, and you need a supplier who has a very flexible operation and a lot of capacity so that they can meet your changing demands instantly. So even though supplier 1 has a better quality and compliance, regulatory compliance performance than supplier 2. In this particular case, or I'm sorry, a worse performance in quality and regulatory compliance. In this particular case, you might choose supplier 1 anyway because they're going to be able to keep your product on the market, and you would be able to make the informed decision to say, I am going to invest in their people and their equipment and their processes to help bring up to speed their regulatory compliance, and I can oversee a little bit more closely their operations until we get to that point. So now I have made an informed decision. Now you could have gone different ways with that decision, but it would have been informed, and that's the key. So it isn't until you bring all the pieces together where you can see that the overall value of the GSPs and how you can prevent the failures that would be occurring, and not understanding why. You chose the best supplier. Why is this failing? So now you can see with more granularity and clarity what's going on behind the scenes. So again, you might be thinking, well, this sounds fantastic, but we have 30,000 suppliers, or we don't have a big team at all, so I don't even know where to start with this. So the neat thing is, first of all, we want you to implement this over time in a way that makes sense for your organization. So for example, choose one solution to implement and then enjoy the value that you experience. Choose a specific product to assess. Start with a brand new product from scratch. Evaluate a legacy supply chain. Anything you do, you're going to start chipping away at the issues that you're feeling, and you will see the success. You can demonstrate internal value with small wins, and then you can decide to grow, how you're going to grow, and how fast you're going to grow the implementation of these tools. Again, you might have the 30,000 suppliers. There's no way you can boil the ocean. So using that risk triage that I mentioned earlier to identify where to use the tools. So for example, which supply chain, which suppliers, which products, which materials will help you make the right decision for your organization, and then importantly, do everything commensurate with the need. You do not have the time, the bandwidth, the resources, or the need to go overboard with anything. So just to give you an idea of where we're going with this, we are looking at a global platform for everyone to be able to access this work. So we are under discussion with the United States Pharmacopoeia about it possibly being a general information chapter or some other form of being implemented into the Pharmacopoeia where people can access it in a way that makes sense. We are also under discussion with APEC regarding their newly released Supply Chain Security Toolkit and possibly adding the GSP solutions into that toolkit. So we are under discussions there as well. And we've had a lot of active interest from the FDA. So we have had the Office of the Commissioner and the Office of Compliance on our team formally. So we have had FDA representation on the team from the very beginning. We also have interest from the Office of Pharmaceutical Quality as we're demonstrating that the supply chain can help support the quality of the product from beginning to end. But what's really interesting to the FDA is the fact that here's a challenge that industry has been faced with. If you think of heparin and melamine and all the issues that we've been faced with, and industry has taken it upon themselves to lead solutions to address this global problem. Industry has not sat back and said, well, I don't have to do anything because FDA isn't forcing me to. There's no regulation, there's no new guidance. So it's exciting that industry has taken the charge on this and has developed such meaningful solutions that can be adopted by the entire global industry. So please join us. Take our work for a test drive. We would love that. You can do that by joining our feasibility studies, and you can try any of the solutions or all of the solutions. And again, you can do it commensurate with the need and your ability at this moment in time. So contact us today to start and help shape the future of your industry with us, and we look forward to engaging with you.